Welcome everyone to the Bent by Knowledge podcast, where we will dig into what current research and the Bible actually have to say about exercise and good nutrition. Welcome back, everybody. Today, again, we have Sam Kramer. We're doing our part 2 of our 2-part series with supplements. And in part 1, we talked a little bit about the process of supplement creation, from the conception of the idea to putting it on the market. And we also talked about a little bit of the regulatory processes behind supplements, which was a really interesting talk. But what I'm super excited to talk about today is the trends in the supplement world. And I want to go over what the trends were in 2020, because I think some of them might leach over into 2021. And then really dig into some of the hot topics in the supplement world that are going to be coming out in 2021. So before we get into some of the trends, I do want to talk about some of the general nutritional supplement industry trends, some of the things that that industry and consumers typically care about. And the top ones in 2020 were transparency, sustainability, naturally sourced supplements, and plant-based products. And I am familiar with all of these topics just because I hear about it so much. But let's start with transparency. Can you explain transparency and talk about what that means in the supplement world?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the formal definition for transparency doesn't really exist, but there are certainly hot buzzwords. One of them is clean label, which also doesn't really have a formal definition in terms of regulation, what needs to be on it. But these are things where essentially customers want to know what's in the product that's stated on the bottle is actually in the product. And we've seen a lot of media issues come up where companies will test, they'll pull 30 to 50 products off of Amazon or off the shelf and do independent third-party testing, and you see that the concentration or the label claim of an ingredient is really low. As an example, about 3 days ago, an article just came out where Now Foods, a very popular dietary supplement brand, independently pulled 30 phosphatidylserine products off of the Amazon market, and a lot of them failed to meet their label claim of the actual amount of phosphatidylserine, which is a phospholipid that's important for brain health and cognition and things like that. So, you're starting to see the industry change in that sense, where companies are trying to call out the bad guys, that aren't doing the right thing, which is a good thing, right? We want this kind of self-regulation that we talked about in our first session. We're seeing that take shape and what that's looking like. So this clean label and the adulteration aspect, other aspects of clean label would be people are looking for the sustainability portion that you mentioned, which I'll talk about in a second. So in addition to the clean label aspect and sustainability, there is also product attributes that people are looking for, like non-GMO, vegan, vegetarian, and there can be certifications within those. Non-GMO Project Verified is like a third-party independent one. So different things like that. And I also think we talked about last time the negative sides of a proprietary blend, where it was kind of the old school method of listing what's in your product, whereas now companies are breaking out those blends and listing the individual amounts of each ingredient and making sure that there's guaranteed potency, that it's the proper standardization to the active ingredient in those, or the active compound in those ingredients, and then also third-party testing like NSF and Informed Choice that are independently providing consumer safety and guarantee that there's no adulteration and there's guaranteed potency in the product.
That's awesome. So it sounds like consumers are getting smart and they're wanting to see this good information, because I think more and more people are caring about what they're putting in their body. And so it's great that transparency is so important, I think, in supplement companies now. And like you keep mentioning, it's just keeping up with the Joneses. So I think the supplement companies that probably weren't putting as much money and effort toward transparency are probably now doing that, because they're realizing it's such an important process.
Absolutely. And you're seeing a lot of transparency on the back end too, that, that the customers don't really see. And this is more, my world on the manufacturing side, where, if we get an ingredient, we will send that ingredient out for third-party testing, and even our finished products, to guarantee that, if we make a product that, if we want 200 milligrams of CoQ10, you're going to get 200 milligrams of CoQ10. So that's something that most companies don't really, it's not necessary. It's not required to demonstrate to customers, but that's more of the back end development with the manufacturers to the retailers, and then it gets passed on to the customer in more consumer friendly images and seals and pictures and things like that on the bottle.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's a good way too on the back end, like you said, to sort of protect the company's own interests. Like, if I am putting effort and money toward transparency, I do in effect know exactly what I'm putting in there, and so I'm protecting myself maybe from some legal claims and all of that stuff. So all in all, for the consumer and for the producer, it sounds like it's a good idea to be transparent.
Yeah, definitely. And the benchmark gets set, or the baseline of where you need to be gets set higher and higher and higher. So, if you have a fish oil and you don't have a Friends of the Sea sustainable or MSC sustainable seal, then you're kind of out boxing yourself, compared to other competitors that, do have those seals and certifications that makes sure that not only is the product of high quality, but it's also sustainable for the environment and things of that nature.
Right. And speaking of sustainability, was another hot topic trend in 2020. Sustainability, it has a pretty big definition, but I'm sure you can dilute it down and make it easy to digest. So can you talk about sustainability a little bit more specifically?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes down to environmental impacts, especially as people are going more plant-based. That's just a huge trend that we'll probably talk about later. So that in itself is more sustainable when you're, selecting plant-based options. But you can get even nitty-gritty into the packaging, which is, you can have different grades of material. Whether it's non-plastic or you're using more environmentally friendly plastic, it could be cheaper, so it could be economically sustainable. There are different aspects. It doesn't have to always be environmental, but that's usually how it plays. And then when you look at the formula, a lot of people are looking for more of the whole food based products, which we can talk about, especially like the sports nutrition. We're seeing this kind of evolution of the sports nutrition world over the past decade or so. But the actual ingredients can be more sustainable. And then you can actually talk about there's a nice story to ingredients that are more sustainable. If the farms of marigold flowers for lutein, which is an eye health ingredient, if that's vertically integrated with the company that distributes the ingredient, then that provides a nice story of providing jobs for people in certain environments and fields, and you can kind of see how everything is processed that is more sustainable for the environment too.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dichotomy too, because I'm a consumer, but saying that I'm worrying about sustainability is me saying that I'm caring about how it affects other people or other industries. So it's really interesting. And I too love the idea of sustainability and helping the environment as much as I can. And like you said, it's trickle down effect. So it's like maybe you're helping some kind of farmer or some kind of person along the way. So
Yep,
that trend
definitely.
is really cool. In addition to, or speaking of farming too, naturally sourced is a really hot topic. Naturally sourced, I always think of like you're just going to a local farm or something like that, and you're getting ingredients that are being naturally grown, no genetic modification, things like that. But it's probably a little bit more intricate. And can you talk to that topic a little bit?
Yeah, so there's actually no formal definition for natural in terms of guidance for the FDA. So it's actually an industry controversy to put natural on your label because there is no formal definition. So the FDA actually cracks down on companies that do list natural. In terms of supplements, food, maybe it's a little bit different. I'm not too keen on that, but there's been a lot of litigation for companies that are listing their products as natural. So if you're in the product development world, probably not a good idea to list your product as natural. I think there's other routes where you can convey that your product is, of higher quality, whether it's vegan or vegetarian or a non-GMO project verification or self-verification or some other third party. Or something like that. So I think there's definitely a push towards a more plant-based and herbs and botanicals and higher quality of standardization to those botanicals. So that you're getting the guaranteed efficacy rather than just if you put it, just as an example, if you put turmeric powder in a product without any standardization to curcuminoids, which is the active ingredient in turmeric or curcumin, you're not getting any benefit. So because turmeric isn't very absorbed very well by the body. So you need a certain standardization or potency to the active ingredient to make sure that you're getting the benefits that you want. And then you can get a little bit deeper with turmeric as just an example with adding other ingredients for improving absorption like black pepper, or actually enhancing the technology of the capsule or the actual ingredient and creating like a film that helps to improve the absorption by protecting the ingredient from the acidic environment of the stomach and then hitting the small intestine for absorption and gets into the bloodstream and all those good things. So, this is a very winded way of saying that, there are things that companies can do beyond saying natural to, support that they're having a higher quality plant-based or more sustainable product.
Yeah, you're so smart. But
Thank you.
This reminds me of, I just chuckle because I'm like, I could listen to you forever and you could just talk. But naturally
time,
sourced,
so, yeah.
we do have time. Naturally sourced, and the way that you were explaining it sort of reminds me, like, how people used to say that, my grandfather died of natural causes, and I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means. Like, what does that mean? So they always die of something. And what you were saying is, it kind of resonated with me thinking about that, because it's like, yeah, you might not say natural source, but there's a more specific way of saying whatever you're trying to say. Like maybe it doesn't have any artificial ingredients in there or something like that. Like you can market it a different way.
Right, like even just another example of how nuanced the language can be. When we talk about sugar, you can say sugar-free, which is one of those nutrient content claims that we talked about before, where essentially it's less than 0.5 gram of sugar per serving. But you can also say no sugar added, which means that there is sugar in there. It just hasn't been added to the product. So that perception, to the customer, to me, is very, very fine, because no sugar added, to some people might think that they could eat the whole bottle and it's totally fine, but you're actually, consuming sugar and a good amount of essentially, candy for lack of a better term, and things like that. So, just when you're reading what we call the PDP, which is like the front of the label with like the title and the claims and how many whatever you're consuming, make sure you look at the back label too, that you're reading the supplement or nutrition facts panel too, because that'll tell you the numbers game as well.
Yep. Be a good consumer.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So in addition to the other three that we just talked about, another really big trend, and we've already mentioned it many times in 2020, is this plant-based trend. And I'm so interested, and I'm not really sure of the history, but I can imagine that it has something to do with, like, we're thinking more sustainable. We're thinking more of how what I'm doing is impacting the environment. We have more people that are trying to reduce their intake of animal products for that reason. And even if it's not technically justified, I know a lot of people can argue the environmental impact of eating animal products. In fact, I just read something on it. I talked about all the science. Even though that's not the case, it's still a hot topic trend. It may not be the case. It's still a hot topic trend and was in 2020. So can you talk about this plant-based movement and maybe how we got here and explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually going to say the same thing about the potential misinterpretation of the data, environmental impact of plant-based eating, and how it may not be as impactful as we may think, because where I read where yes, it is more environmentally friendly, quote unquote, to go more plant-based versus animals. But if you look at what the actual contribution to environmental pollutants are, food is a very, very low total percentage. And the larger percentage is more like travel, like cars and human, technology and things like that. So maybe that's where you were going with it. But I just thought that was interesting, because I was going to say the same thing too. So I'll throw myself under the bus for all those people out there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but certainly it's obviously, eating more plants isn't a bad thing, right? Everybody needs more fiber. There are certainly benefits to going more plant-based, but then there can be downsides too, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. But how we got here, I mean, I think, there's been this crazy push for plant-based across the board as a lifestyle, and whatever the trickle down lifestyle, things that go with it are. But I think a part of it is that the innovation has gotten so good that it's very easy. I think in the past, if you went plant-based, you'd be eating things that tasted like cardboard, whereas now you have plant-based stuff that looks and tastes pretty close to meat, which is pretty amazing. So it's kind of gone that way in the supplement world too, especially like a plant-based protein, where they can sometimes still be super nasty. They can be gritty and very bitter and earthy on the back end, and all those things. But there's so much innovation in cream, like you can have a plant-based creamer, and taste and texture modifiers, and the actual masking of the plant, and different flavors. You can have all these innovative things that I think would make it very easy for people to go to this kind of plant-based change.
Yeah. And a lot of what you said is so interesting. Can we back up just a little bit? So when we say we're going plant-based, can you talk about some of the animal-based ingredients or supplements that people may not know about, or in this case, if they're going more plant-based, what they're trying to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, there's only a couple in my mind that are truly animal-based where you can't find a plant-based alternative. So protein has animal sources. There's whey and casein, which come from milk, egg, beef, chicken. You could pretty much find any animal, and there could be a protein source for it. And collagen as well. Typically that's going to come from fish or pig or cow. There are some plant-based collagen precursors out there, but the research hasn't really been fleshed out on those, and really consuming the actual collagen is definitely more beneficial than a precursor, because we don't know if that will actually convert to the actual active collagen. I'm sure your dose has to be super high anyway.
Yeah.
So in terms of, and plant-based is a spectrum. I mean, and even, the term, vegetarian is, definitely a spectrum where you can have people who are, flexitarian, where maybe they where they don't consume one particular animal source, but they'll eat everything else under the sun. Where the other extreme would be a raw vegan, where they're only consuming, plant-based items that aren't cooked, above a certain temperature. It'd be raw. And you can live, kind of in between that. You could be lacto-ovo, you could be pescatarian. So, it kind of depends on your individual lifestyle, but whatever you're, for the most part, if you are trying to find plant-based items, it's very easy. I just think as a dietitian, particularly, it's just more challenging to meet all of your nutritional needs when you're living on this vegetarian spectrum, because, when I said a little bit before where you have to read the facts panel on the back, remember that that's kind of an estimate, and it's a rounding number. So it doesn't take into account the actual absorptions of these ingredients. Mm-hmm. So with a lot of plant-based nutrients, what I always tell people to keep in mind is that your absorption of most nutrients are much lower. This is mostly in foods, and in supplements, it's a little bit different, and we can talk about that too. But for the most part, your absorption is a lot lower with plant-based compared to animal-based sources. Then you can also have nutrient interaction with plant-based items that can counteract the absorption of each other. So just little things that you have to keep in mind if you're going to, choose that lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. I am curious too, because so the thing that I think about when I think about plant-based is they're deciding to go plant-based, and they're getting away from animal-based sources, which in my head, I'm only thinking about protein. And so mm-hmm. I am curious to know if there's any overall processing differences between an animal-based and a plant-based protein in the sense that are there any negative implications of eating plant-based proteins because of the processing, or am I making sense?
Yeah, to my knowledge, no. I mean, typically with some plant-based items, there have been historically some issues. Like, for example, there were rice crops for a while that have very high arsenic levels, which is a heavy metal, which you definitely want to avoid. But in modern times, it's pretty standard in terms of manufacturing processes to be very easy, especially for a protein, which is relatively common. We call it a commodity because it's just omnipresent in the industry, and pretty much everybody and their mom has a rice protein isolate. Everybody's going to have it. So it's one of those things where it's not too much of a concern. But from my perspective, when I'm sourcing a protein, you always check with quality to make sure that they do test for their heavy metals and the potentially dangerous microbials that can infect the crop, and making sure that whatever they spec their protein content to, if they say that their rice protein isolate is 80% rice protein, it better be 80%, so those things that are just always in the back of my mind. And this is for every ingredient, not just the plant-based, you want to make sure that you're looking out for in terms of quality.
Yeah. And coming from the protein world as a former and a little bit here now protein researcher, it's always so mm-hmm. interesting to me, because we tend to, as researchers, really get in the weeds and split hairs with what we're concerned with. Like, for instance, we talk about how 20 grams versus 25 grams is going to make a difference in whatever outcome it is, muscle protein synthesis, body composition, whatever it is.
Right. FSR. Yeah. Very, very right. It's very oversized.
Definitely over-scienced and maybe doesn't translate as well because normal people don't necessarily care about that stuff. And in this case, when we're talking about plant-based versus animal-based, there is some data that does show there are clear benefits of animal protein versus plant protein. But the thing that I want to make sure that everybody knows is that in general, when you're looking at overall health, it doesn't really matter the source or if it's plant-based versus protein-based or versus animal-based. It matters that you're getting the protein in that you need during the length of the
Sure.
day, and you're getting quality protein, whatever that means for you, and you're going to be pretty well off. So overall, if you're sitting on the fence between picking a plant-based protein and an animal-based protein, I mean, just pick one, pick your poison and go from there. But
Yeah.
do you have anything else to add to that? Maybe benefits or
Yeah, sure. I can throw in a couple nuggets. Yeah, 'cause you definitely stimulated a lot of thought process. It was interesting about the research aspect where it gets so over scienced, which I think it's important to understand those nuances on a grander scale, right? Like maybe 20 versus 25 grams. Okay, that's not that important, but 20 versus 40 grams, okay, that's a little more interesting because now from my perspective, from a product development perspective, do I put in double the serving size, which is definitely going to drive up the cost to the customer? It might be less servings per tub. So would they spend $35 on a 15 to 20 serving product, or can you get some cool claims? Can I put in an amino acid blend that maybe has some research that it's equivalent to 20 grams of whey protein and they can take it as an intra workout or something? So I think like that science of comparing benefits to the customer that are practical are definitely important. But for sure, I definitely agree that as long as you're getting the quality and amount of protein that you need, I always say there's a million ways to skin the nutrition cat, right? I think the problem is when people create these dogmas of, you have to follow this lifestyle because X, Y, and Z, and they're usually interpreting the information quite inaccurately. Whereas if you just take a step back and say, as long as you're getting, a good amount of protein and, if you're a recreational person and not an elite athlete, you let carbs and fat fall to the wayside, and fall into place, you're probably going to be fine. When you talk about supplements, it's definitely a little more balanced in terms of absorption with animal versus plant-based protein, because the plant-based proteins are typically processed, so it's an isolate or a hydrolysate. So in the manufacturing process, the peptides are of the amino acids, the actual bonds of the amino acids are broken down, so your body can process them a little bit easier and they get into the bloodstream. Where you do see some differences, though, is actually in actual food sources. And that's where I always tell people to just be cautious and make sure that you're doing, more of an objective approach, get a blood panel, make sure that all of your nutrients, in terms of measuring your blood panel of all the common nutrients, not just protein, but your omega blood content, your B12, your vitamin D, all of these, because plant-based sources for some of these, for the absorption of some of these are quite low compared to animal-based sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many things. Oh my gosh, we could talk about protein forever. I love talking about protein. But overall,
Me too.
pick your protein source. Make sure that you
Yes.
trust the label, you trust the manufacturer, and that you're getting and consuming the dose that you need.
Make sure that it tastes good too. Don't think it has to be gross.
Yeah.
Especially on the plant-based side. Typically, pea protein, if you don't have an allergy, is typically the smoothest. Whereas once you start getting into rice, that's definitely a little grittier. But there are some newer proteins out there that are much smoother and don't have this kind of grittiness. There's pumpkin, there's sacha inchi, there's watermelon, there's cranberry. I mean, there's mung mung bean. There's like tons out there. Like it's crazy.
You're getting me so excited. I used to be a little girl in a candy store when I would go into like a supplement shop because I would get so excited to try all the new things. And I'm like, I need to go try now this mung bean protein. Now that you say that.
My problem is that now I go in there and I'm like, what's wrong with everything? And I have to read everything and make sure that they're not promoting, something that's not efficacious.
Yeah, yeah. I used to love going into supplement stores too and not telling the salesman like that I know a little bit about supplements and just let them
Right.
try to bestow on me the information that they have. And I'd be silently judging them. Don't tell anybody else I did that.
Yep, I hear you.
So those were the trends from 2020. Are there any new trends that are going to emerge in 2021? And I know, of course, a lot of the ones that we just talked about are going to bleed over into 2021. But considering the time that we're in, can you speak to anything else that's going to be coming out in 2021?
Yeah. I mean, well, to kind of step back just a little bit for 2020, COVID really changed the game. Especially from a supplement perspective. I mean, it really, the categories that grew astronomically, top three would be sleep, stress, and immunity. It kind of makes sense, right? Because people, they became more conscious of their health, which is a great thing. And they're looking for, perhaps, what I like to call like an OTC alternative. So perhaps, they're looking for the supplement route because they don't want to take an over the counter that might have side effects. Supplements are typically not, they don't act immediately. You usually have to take them for a couple weeks for them to actually, take effect, and your body has to adapt to them essentially. But what's been really interesting with sleep, stress, and immunity is we've seen a lot of innovation in these worlds. We're seeing a lot of cross categorization. So we're seeing the combination of stress and immunity, or stress and sleep, or even beauty and sleep. Ollie just came out with a beauty sleep gummy, which is pretty interesting. I've never really seen that before. Prior to really this year, it just wasn't as popular. A lot of the big brands weren't doing it. Now that's happening. But we're also seeing what I like to call specificity, where, let's just take the immune category as an example. We would have our classic immune ingredients like vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc, or elderberry, whatever. And now we're starting to incorporate ingredients that are more novel, like beta glucans, for example, which most people haven't heard of. And the ingredients like beta glucans and others actually have specific benefits to aspects of immune health. So like upper respiratory tract health, or sinus support, or lower respiratory tract health. So it's actually targeting a specific area within these targeted categories, which I think is really fascinating. And gummies are exploding too. Everybody wants glorified candy. So
Oh yeah, I have them. I take them every morning.
Yeah. So yeah, I think those three categories, and then in terms of the delivery form, gummies and also like ready to drinks are also very popular. So people are looking for like very convenience, but also the experiential aspect. They want to like taste and feel their product, and have an experience with it, rather than just, popping your traditional capsules and tablets and things like that.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me too that the sleep, stress, and immunity is big now. Of course, it's because COVID, but it's not like it wasn't always a problem. Like, anxiety has
Sure.
always been a problem. Sleep issues have
Yep.
always been a problem. And it takes a pandemic for us to realize that we do need to care more about our health and to make sure that we're supplementing our diet so that we can do these things.
Yeah.
So,
And I would say, so just to kind of finish your question too. So in addition to those three, a couple other big ones where we're big trends, I think that will continue. Anything with brain health and cognition is super big. the FDA is pretty critical on all of cognitive function and memory claims. You have to be very buttoned up with your claim substantiation in terms of gold standard randomized control trials, showing efficacy of the same variables. But it could be tricky with those studies because the actual cognitive tests aren't usually consistent throughout. There's different batteries of tests out there. So, that's kind of the lens that I take of really diving in and like, okay, is this test validated? And is it actually measuring these different elements of memory and accuracy and reaction time and things like that are, that are important, but also, very, very nuanced within the cognitive function domain.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, and just it's kind of, sparking more different avenues in my brain. I guess there's a pun intended there. The gaming aspect is super huge now, I think, because of COVID. So there's a lot of not just ingredients, but also the actual marketing of the brand. Like I think Ghost, if anybody knows the brand out there, they just came out with an actual gamer type pre-workout. So it's got a new level out there, which is a branded ingredient that's it's arginine, silicate, and inositol that has some cognitive function benefits. It's very similar to nitrosogene, which is also arginine silicate, which is a very common pre-workout vasodilation ingredient. Same company that makes it. But yeah, so you're seeing these like very, very niche applications to these broader targeted areas.
So funny. Those gamers, some of them make more money than I'll ever make in my life. So if I made that much money
in a day, even us combined. So.
Oh my gosh, so funny. So we talked about the general nutritional supplement industry trends, but I would like to go into some of the ingredient trends specifically, and we can sort of like glaze through the ones from 2020, and maybe you can get a little further into all the stuff that you talked about with immunity and things like that, with the specific ingredients that are coming out, so people can look forward to or look to buy something. That might be hitting the shelves. So the first one is the biggest one, which we talked about a little bit last time, which is CBD oil, cannabinoids. They are exploding. And I know we talked about last time with the regulatory process, they're not necessarily regulated in the same way that supplements are regulated because they're regulated as like a drug, right?
Yeah. So just to kind of give a brief overview of what I mentioned last time. So currently CBD is not considered a dietary supplement by the FDA. In 2018, the federal farm bill was passed, which federally allowed the selling of hemp, and CBD is a constituent of hemp. It's the non-psychoactive component. It's one of the cannabinoids, and there's like a bunch of them out there. So while hemp is federally allowed to be sold, it's actually controlled by the state that you live in. So you can live in a state where hemp is not allowed to be sold. So if you do sell it there, it's illegal. And CBD was so with the passing of the 2018 federal farm bill, CBD effectively was taken off of the Schedule I drug class, which is controlled by the DEA. So CBD was considered up there with like heroin, cocaine, all these really hard drugs. But now it's technically legal in the eyes of the DEA. However, the FDA controls whether it's a dietary supplement status. And because there was a drug application that was filed and approved by the FDA that is a CBD isolate called Epidiolex by GW Pharmaceuticals for epilepsy. Once something is approved as a drug, it cannot be a dietary supplement. So currently, that's why CBD is technically not a dietary supplement. So the industry is trying to work on approving CBD as a dietary supplement, whereas because the drug version Epidiolex is a CBD isolate, which is super, super concentrated. Perhaps the proper regulatory pathway would be, well, okay, you can't use a CBD isolate, but you can use other CBD lower concentrations, that would be below a certain threshold. So that's kind of where the industry wants to be. It just takes a long time. So I don't think the FDA will approve it in the next couple of years. I think it'll take a little while because there's a new FDA commissioner who says, we don't have long-term safety data. We've actually seen some liver toxicity in rat models. So I don't really see it happening anytime soon, unfortunately. But what's interesting is, I was going to say, what's interesting is that companies are still doing it anyway, right? So it's weird because the FDA is only really cracking down on companies that are making disease-based claims, which is formulation 101 you don't do anyway. So there's this kind of risk-based assessment of making a CBD formula, because there's evidence that shows basically how it works is CBD activates the endocannabinoid system, which is this system in your body that acts as kind of a pain relief, for lack of a better term. And you have different receptors all throughout your body. You have CB1 and CB2 receptors. CB1 is in your brain. CB2 is pretty much everywhere else along your body, GI tract, joints, immune system, et cetera, et cetera. So when CBD or cannabidiol can bind to those receptors, it essentially acts as like an indirect lock and key. So it unlocks the endocannabinoid system, and it creates this downstream cascade of events that can activate the endocannabinoid system. So because there's CB1 and CB2 receptors all throughout the body, you get all these different benefits from CBD. So because there's CB1 receptors in the brain, you get more mood support, more clinical research for anxiety and depression and schizophrenia. But then because there's CB2 receptors on joints and immune health and all these other locations, you can get these other potential benefits of CBD as well. So that's why it kind of gets promoted as this, cure-all or panacea. But the kicker or the catch with that is that the dose of CBD in most clinical human trials is really, really high, like 600 milligrams and up for efficacy. So that would be like the whole bottle of CBD that you would buy.
Which nobody normally knows. So when you purchase a product, you're just taking the serving they want, and that's how companies make their money. So that's good stuff to know as a consumer.
And it's very expensive. I mean, there are part of the problem with not having a proper regulatory pathway is that companies there's no set standard of what the dosing protocol should be. So you'll see, some products will have 25 milligrams, some will have 500, some will have 2,000. There will be tinctures and gummies and capsules and tablets and chewables and shampoos. I mean, it's crazy, there's just so much out there, but there's really no, optimal dose that's determined yet. And then how long do you take it for? Should you take it, and not have any, breaks in between? Do you need to cycle off of it? Is there any potential issues with that? We just don't know yet. So it can be, potentially dangerous in that aspect. And what also can happen is that if you take a product, because there's really no proper regulation, you can take a drug test and you can still test positive for THC because, there is, so as I mentioned, the 2018 Farm Bill, you can sell hemp, but you have to, there's basically two types of hemp. There's full spectrum hemp and broad spectrum hemp. Full spectrum hemp does contain THC, but it's set at a legal limit of 0.3%, whereas broad spectrum hemp doesn't have any THC. They completely take it out. So if you take a full spectrum hemp, but it's one of these companies that isn't, doesn't have if they're not doing the right thing, they're not going to test for THC. And if you take a very small volume like a gummy, and you concentrate all of those ingredients in there, you can bring the THC levels up pretty high. So you can either get a psychoactive effect or you can test positive for THC.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, I'm coming into this conversation as an exercise physiologist. I always want to know what these supplements do for exercise performance and if there are any benefits, maybe for things like recovery. Do we know in the research literature right now, are any claims substantiated?
Not right now. I mean, based on the human clinical data that we have, it's all it's all clinical applications, I should say. So it's more anxiety and depression and schizophrenia. So maybe that would have some kind of mental benefit for the athlete if they're feeling nervous and there's an anti-anxiety aspect to it. But we don't have any specific applications for athletes. Same thing with joint, where from a mechanistic standpoint, there are CB2 receptors on the joint. So in theory, it would, have a joint pain relief effect, but we just don't know at this time.
If they get the 600 milligrams.
Yeah, and then see what happens exactly.
Right. Well, gosh, CBD is really interesting, but another hot topic ingredient is collagen. And I see this all over the place, especially with women. Women love thinking about collagen because collagen is a structural type of protein, and it helps. Women love thinking about how it helps them with their wrinkles and keeping their face all upright. But in general, this collagen has exploded. In fact, in our old lab, they're doing some work with collagen right now, collagen protein or something with athletes. So can you talk about collagen and what people normally use collagen for, and maybe if there's any benefits there?
Yeah. So collagen, as you mentioned, is typically it's a structural part of pretty much every joint and cartilage, and so we are very high. Humans are very high percentage of collagen. About super high percentage of your structural component is it's like 80%, I think, of the structural component of a human is collagen. So it basically helps with the elasticity of the joints, provides cushioning in between the joints. So it's providing flexibility, comfort in joint to that area as well as skin. So there are different types. There's like 8 or 9 different types of collagen. So there's type 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 10. I think the list goes on a little bit. But basically the type of collagen can dictate the functionality. And collagen is essentially made up of 3 amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of protein. Collagen is not a complete protein, which means that it does not contain all the essential amino acids that the body needs to make protein. It doesn't even contain methionine, which is the first amino acid in making all the proteins in your body. So collagen should not replace your protein intake, whether it's food or a supplement. So just be cautious of that. That's not the functionality. So types 1 and 3, which typically come from fish or eggshell membrane, are more for your skin, fine lines and wrinkles, things of that nature. And then type 2 is typically more for joint comfort and flexibility. So what I think our lab is doing, I think they're doing collagen peptides, which is essentially a more processed version of collagen. So it's essentially a lower molecular weight of the amino acids strung together, so it helps them to be absorbed into the bloodstream a little bit better. So if you are consuming collagen, you typically want to go with a peptide because it's already primed to be absorbed by the body a little bit better. So collagen can come in a variety of delivery forms. You can get gummies, you can get creamers, capsules, tablets, powders. Vital Proteins is probably like the biggest brand. They just dominate the space in terms of their collagen creamers and powders. They just got into the sports nutrition world. They just came out with a pre-workout. They're pretty much crushing the game, so to speak.
Interesting. Yeah, and I know you mentioned collagen can help with joint health too, so I can imagine that for people that are exercisers, it might be a good idea to supplement. Maybe even an aging exerciser, it would be an ideal situation to supplement with collagen to help with joint pain.
Yeah, there's a very specific branded material called UC2 It's comes from chicken. It's chicken collagen essentially, and there's good clinical research on joint comfort, flexibility, and mobility in a super low dose. It's like 40 milligrams, so super small.
Okay.
Whereas typically with most collagen based supplements, you have to consume grams worth, at least 2.5 grams, depending on the material, if not higher, upwards 5, 10, 15 grams.
So speaking of that, is this sort of like protein in that if you want to get those higher doses, you're going to have to supplement, or do you get a similar dose in a normal serving of, let's say, meat?
It's a good question. I'm actually not too sure. I don't know what the equivalency would be, but I think it's beneficial to have the supplement route, because if you are consuming it in food, it's probably not as so I wanted to say it's not as processed, but processed typically has a negative connotation. I mean, it's not as manufactured to be broken down structurally. So if you're consuming food, you have to chew it, you have to break it down, you have to absorb it. That takes a lot of energy, and you might not get the full dose that you need. Whereas collagen supplements are typically, like I mentioned, if they're already in peptide form, they're already all that work is already done for you. So all you have to do is absorb it. So you're getting that guaranteed dose. So I would say that collagen is definitely a good supplement, especially if you're athletic. It definitely can't hurt, especially because there's so many easy ways to add it to your diet. Even if you drink coffee or tea or a shake or something, you can just throw it in there, and it's pretty easy to get it.
Okay. Interesting. The next hot topic supplement is an interesting one, and I'm really interested to hear about it. It's medicinal mushrooms. And in fact, I've done a little bit of work in our old lab with cordyceps, which is one of the types of medicinal mushrooms. It's like I don't know which one we use, but it was in a supplement that we got a little bit of funding for, and we use it in powerlifters and rugby players and stuff. But
cool.
There are some purported therapeutic effects of medicinal mushrooms. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about first why people would even consider using medicinal mushrooms, and maybe some of the benefits that you might see.
Sure. Yeah. So mushrooms in general are part the Ayurvedic system of medicine, which is the ancient Eastern Indian medicine it's actually the oldest medicinal, or the oldest historic medical, I guess, like philosophy, if for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's like where yoga came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been used for thousands of years. So the mushrooms are typically they are, and so within the Ayurveda system, there's also the adaptogens, and the adaptogens essentially help to decrease cortisol, which is your primary stress hormone. So mushrooms definitely have that mechanism, and they also have vitamin D. Vitamin D plays a role in immune health and a bunch of other. It's the only mineral, or the only vitamin, I should say, that's a hormone. So it can actually bind to your DNA receptors and have a lot of these potential downstream effects. However, the vitamin D form in mushrooms is D2, ergocalciferol, which is absorbed way less than the D3 form, which is cholecalciferol. So if you are going to choose a vitamin D supplement, mushrooms is okay, but especially in food, it's really not as high of a level. So, and there are plant-based D3 versions that you can find out there. So that's kind of a separate tangent, but yeah. So people will typically use them for the immune benefits and the potential anti-stress, anxiety benefits as well.
Very cool. And for that reason, I'd imagine that it might be good to supplement with that if you're concerned about exercise or aerobic performance. So mental benefits, there's probably not much research, if at all, on that, but
So I was just going to mention, so there is a blend of 8 mushrooms out there called Pico 2. It's like cordyceps, turkey tail, reishi, like a bunch of other, or I guess 5 other mushrooms out there. And if 2 grams is the clinical dose, and it has been shown to improve VO2 max in endurance trained athletes. So that's really the only like branded blend of mushrooms that I know that has specific benefits for endurance athletes. Which is
Very
kind of cool.
interesting. And
Yeah.
plant-based.
Yes, and plant-based.
Oh, so another one too that I love to talk about because this exploded, I think, because of bulletproof coffee
Oh
was
yeah.
medium chain triglycerides or MCTs.
Hmm.
They're a type of fatty acid that have been shown to support a number of things, but I think part of when they came on the scene was when somebody developed what's called bulletproof coffee. So you could probably talk about that a little bit more, but basically you put a medium chain triglyceride into a cup of coffee, and people like to combine it with things like intermittent fasting. And anecdotally, there are some benefits, but I'm not too sure about the literature. So I'm wondering if you could first talk about why people would normally use MCTs and maybe if there are any actual benefits that are supported by the research.
Man, we could talk a whole hour just about MCTs.
I know.
Yeah, so I'll be somewhat brief. So in order to talk about MCTs, I guess we have to talk about the other types of fatty acids that you can find. So basically, you have short chain fatty acids, medium chain triglycerides, and long chain fatty acids. And essentially, what the long, medium, and short is referring to is how many carbons are on the fatty acid chain. So we're getting very, very basic science, physiology, technical here, but we won't get too crazy. So MCTs are between 8 and 11 carbons, depending on the structure. And typically for the normal foods that you eat are typically composed of mostly long chain fatty acids, especially vegetable oils, butter, or things of that nature. Those have to be processed through the liver in order to eventually be sent out to the rest of the body to use for fuel or for storage, or, it kind of depends on the situation. MCTs, on the other hand, are metabolized slightly different because of their shorter nature of the number of carbons on the chain. They can actually bypass traditional digestion from the liver and go right to usually the muscle to be utilized. So the reason why MCTs get this really big benefit is that they can be used for fuel because of that bypassing the liver, and they don't have to go through this long process of energy expenditure to be utilized. So that's typically why people will use it. However, part of the problem with that is that the actual dose needed is really, really high, like over 50 grams. And once you start getting at that level, you start getting terrible GI distress, stomach pains, et cetera, et cetera. So from a practical perspective, in my mind, I think there's, it's not dangerous, right? If you want to add MCTs to your coffee or whatever, I guess it's okay. But people will typically use it either for, like you mentioned, intermittent fasting or even keto. However, I always like to tell people, just because you're burning more fat doesn't mean that it's actual stored adipose tissue. It's usually because you're consuming more fat.
Right.
So it's actually
just to interject really quick. What people don't understand, especially, and you see this all the time in the literature, is that it's always a matter of supply and demand. So if I am fasted for a long time and I consume coffee mixed with butter, I'm gonna first oxidize or burn what's just entered into my body rather than what I have stored. And so even though studies might say that there's an increase in fat oxidation when you consume something like bulletproof coffee or an MCTs, it's likely that you're consuming the digested form or the exogenous form, not the fat that you have stored within your body. So it's definitely a misconception. And what people need to know is that, it's just that.
And if you are, the intensity at which you, and this will dictate on your training status, but typically the intensity at which you exercise will dictate the fuel that you're going to burn or oxidize, as we like to say in the field. So if you consume MCTs, but then you're doing sprints, you're going to be burning carbohydrates. And if you don't have any carbohydrates in your tank, then you're not going to be able to say what we call metabolically flex, or switch from burning from fat to carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. So really, the whole ketogenic diet for athletes has really only shown maybe some marginal benefits for very long-term endurance ultrathons, whereas anything shorter than that, even marathons or ultra walking, if anybody reads any Louise Burke papers from the Australia Institute of Sport, shows that there's either no benefit or a hindrance in performance. So, I always ask people, do you want to be fast or do you want to look good? Because that's also going to play a factor too, because it's all about, it's like you mentioned, it's all supply and demand. So whatever you're burning, you're going to take it from somewhere. So it's people, I think, we're a little off tangent, but that's okay. But, overall, I think if you're consuming MCTs, I think it's fine, but I don't think it's going to be this magical thing. It's going to make you either look better or go faster.
Right. Yeah. Because you do need it in those high doses. But like you said before, I do want to come back to it, is that it's not bad that you're consuming MCTs. And in fact, a lot of really good and nutritious foods contain these medium chain triglycerides. So can you name a few of those foods? Like coconut oil, right, is one.
Yeah, all of your oils typically do. Coconut's probably the most well-known. I can't think of any others that would be of any higher amount, because pretty much all of your plant-based oils will have some, medium chain, because all of them have, different fatty acid profiles. Some have more polyunsaturated, some have monounsaturated, or different chain lengths. So I think coconut's probably the most well-known.
Yeah, for sure. And so what I'm getting at is that even if you do take them in doses that are lower than doses that are proven to be effective or shown to be effective, it's good, because you're getting in these really good, what we would call superfoods, things like that. So just something to consider for sure, but you don't need bulletproof coffee to do anything.
Yeah, it sounds gross to me. I wouldn't want to drink coffee with butter and then go work out.
Yeah, I've tried it. It's definitely not appealing.
I think never mind. Because I was gonna, I'll say it anyway. I think I got into some trouble, some legal trouble. That's all I'll say. And don't quote me on it, but I think I saw that publicly somewhere. So
I'm gonna do a search.
Yeah, and check it out.
So the last one that I want to talk about is prebiotics, not probiotics, like you've probably heard before. And prebiotics has its own goal and its own utility in the supplement world, especially when you're taking it in concert with probiotics. So I would love for you to talk about why people use prebiotics and maybe a little bit of, the food physiology around it, and if there are any benefits.
Yeah. And I'll probably talk a little bit about probiotics with this too, because I think it's hard to talk about one and to not talk about the other. But yeah, so prebiotics are essentially non-digestible compounds that are utilized by the probiotics, or the live bacteria in your gut, that essentially promote a beneficial effect to the host, which is you. So typically, the non-digestible prebiotics are fibers. So very common prebiotic fibers are what we call FOS, GOS, and ZOS. So it's fructooligosaccharides, galactooligosaccharides, and xylooligosaccharides. So very fancy term for saying very, very short chain carbohydrates. So they don't really get digested and absorbed very readily by the body, because they're so tiny, similar to the MCTs, where they don't have to go through the normal digestion and absorption process, because they're not very big molecules. They're very small, so they can kind of slip right past all the different digestive enzymes, and fibers don't get digested anyway. They basically go right to your large intestine and your small intestine, where the probiotics live primarily, and they get fermented or used. So essentially prebiotics act as food for the probiotics, and they promote an environment.
Just to back up really quick for people that are listening, probiotics, they're good to have, right? So
oh yeah, so I guess I could talk about probiotics really quickly. So the traditional probiotic formulation in the past, which we thought was, let's just throw as many probiotics as we can into a supplement, and we'll put 15 strains in there, we'll put 30 billion CFUs. CFU stands for colony forming units, which is the live bacterial unit count of how many probiotics are actually in the formula. Part of, I guess, a good thing about this is that you're getting a lot of strain diversity. So you're getting, different lactobacillus and bifidobacterium and all these popular strains that you may have heard of that essentially work to populate the gut and promote a healthy environment. And then you're getting a really high CFU count, 30 billion. I've seen 50 billion. I've seen 100 billion. It's like the benchmark just gets higher and higher and higher. So, that kind of was this old philosophy. Now what we're starting to see is, which I like where this direction is going, is that the probiotic research is getting very, very specific, kind of similar to the immune aspect, where we're getting a little deeper into the funnel of the application, where it's not so much about, let's see how many strains we can throw in there and a really high potency. It's which actual strains are doing the work and what's the clinical dose of those strains. So now, instead of seeing 15 strains in there, you'll see 1 or 2 strains at the actual clinical dose of those particular strains. So for example, in the old days, we would put Bifidobacterium lactis, Lactobacillus acidophilus, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, a couple others, whatever. The problem with that is that's only the genus and the species. It doesn't tell you the actual strain of the probiotic that you're using. In order to indicate the strain, you need a string of letters and numbers after the Lactobacillus rhamnosus, such as GG or GR1. There's tons of them out there. And I like to think of it as saying, if I was looking for Sam Kramer, I would need the actual strain of the probiotic. If I wanted somebody in the Kramer family, I would only say the genus and the species. So by only putting the genus and the species, you're not actually picking the correct strain that's doing all the heavy lifting. So this is a very long-winded way, again, of saying that the research is becoming much more specific. So if you see a probiotic out there that is only 1 or 2 strains and maybe, only 2 to 5 or 10 billion CFUs per strain, don't necessarily write that off as being worse than this blend of, 15 genus species that's 50 billion CFU, because you don't know how much you're getting or what strain you're getting in those probiotic blends.
Yeah. And that's actually really good to know, because we tend to just look at the masses and how much can I get, like if there's more ingredients in it, that tends to be better. But I would
a more is better mentality.
Yeah, the more is better. But I would like to know too. So basically what you're saying is probiotics are the bacteria that help our gut. Prebiotics are what is being fed to the probiotics. The probiotics can do their job. Is that right?
Correct. There's also new terminology out there. There's synbiotics, which is a prebiotic fiber and a probiotic together that has to be studied like in like a clinical trial where they're put together. So that's a synbiotic. A postbiotic is a heat-killed probiotic strain, which means that it's a spore, or it's basically it's purposefully killed, so it's quote unquote dead and or inactive, and it's ingested, and it essentially is dormant until it bypasses the stomach acid in the gut, and then it flourishes when it hits the small and the large intestine. So it's a processing method to kind of ensure that it reaches where it needs to go, because another potential issue of probiotics and these blends and things like that is that there's no guarantee that the potency that you're getting is going to actually, populate the gut. So there's been a lot of innovation in technology in the capsule to ensure that there's, an environment for the probiotics to survive and bypass the stomach acid.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So much stuff to go to talk about with that too. But just quickly,
Yeah.
can you tell me too, why I even care about a healthy gut bacterial colony? Like, why is
Yeah.
taking prebiotics and having a good probiotic colony good for the gut? And maybe linking that with exercise too, because I know there's a ton of exercise research that's coming out.
Sure. So, okay, let me think about this. So we are more bacterial cells than we are human cells. and that's kind of the answer right there, right? Is that they make up a larger percentage than we are bacteria. It's like which is crazy to think about. But you essentially want these positive bacterial strains in your body plus a prebiotic if you can, in order to create that environment and for them to thrive, because there's such good research on different applications, as you kind of alluded to. In a traditional sense, the bacterial strains were originally for immune health and gastrointestinal health, typically because they can both act directly and indirectly on the immune system. So they can essentially they can act as messengers for the immune system and activate different aspects of your innate and adaptive immunity. They can downregulate pro-inflammation, so they can turn off your immune system if it's kicked on, kind of an overdrive. And then for gastrointestinal issues, it can help with constipation, diarrhea. There's been clinical applications for IBS and IBD. If you have some kind of gastrointestinal issue, or if you were born premature or born with a C-section versus a traditional delivery method, your natural gut bacteria makeup is different. So, having these probiotics are super important. And then about 5 or 10 years ago, the gut-brain axis was discovered, which linked your enteric nervous system, which is kind of your second brain. It actually lives in your stomach. Mm-hmm. And it's been shown to have direct communication to the brain in your head. So this really opened the door to a lot of other applications for probiotics and prebiotics too, in theory, which we still don't know a lot about. But, there's been applications for weight management, different performance for athletics, cognition, mood, stress, all these other, kind of broader applications beyond the traditional gut and immune health, for these tiny little bugs that make up who.
Yeah. And they're so important. I mean, and it is worthwhile to look into supplementation with prebiotics and probiotics, because a lot of people aren't getting what they need in their diet.
Yep.
And so definitely interesting and worth looking into.
Yeah, it's very challenging to get probiotics in your diet. There are some fermented foods like kimchi and kefir and yogurt, but the dose is probably nowhere where it needs to be. And plus, because you're eating food and consuming with other macronutrients and other elements, that your stomach acid gets kicked on when you're eating food. So it's probably going to destroy all of the active cultures in a food anyway. So that's why consuming in a capsule, or a chewable tablet or a gummy or anything like that is, with that guaranteed potency, is all the more important. And then again, the strain specificity, so you're getting the right strains for the right application at the right dose.
Yeah. So much great information. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is any of the specific supplements that are coming in 2021. And I know you mentioned a lot of the trends being related to COVID and stress and things like that, and sleep and immunity. So are there any hot topic supplement ingredients that you're seeing are going to come on the scene in 2021?
Ingredients specifically, I think ashwagandha and the other Ayurvedic herb, any kind of herbs and botanicals are really going to, explode. I think ashwagandha is similar to mushrooms in being an adaptogen, so it helps with stress. There's some of the branded materials out there that have other applications like sleep and cognition and all these other cool things. So I think we'll see a lot of innovation in the that space because people are looking for that kind of plant-based, quote unquote natural, right? No formal definition, but that kind of alternative. And I think just, this kind of continued innovation for different attributes of products. Like I think organic is going to be really big. I think people are going to be looking for, like, instead of a traditional vitamin C, people will want a plant-based organic vitamin C, and, kind of your, all these foundational nutrients that we talked about last time that are kind of your essential everyday multivitamins and probiotics and vitamins and minerals and things like that. I think we'll see a lot more whole food based type things. And then, in sports nutrition as well. I think with sports nutrition, what I didn't talk about a little bit before, just briefly, I think sports nutrition classically was this very hardcore, everything needs to be vein, skin tearing pumps and explode your mind and, a ton of caffeine. But we're seeing this evolution of people who don't want that. They're kind of the weekend warrior, maybe a little more, whole food based yoga enthusiasts, that type of moms that go to the gym, that kind of thing. And we're seeing ingredients that are catering to that, maybe a caffeine free pre-workout, or even more specific around nutrient timing around the workout. So instead of just a pre-workout and protein, you're starting to see intra-workout and recovery and sleep and reducing DOMS and muscle soreness. So we're seeing a lot of specificity within sports nutrition and catering around when you're working out, more at a granular level and whole food level rather than just pre and post, and they taste, like rocket candy and then you're done. So
yeah, don't get me on protein or nutrient timing. That is my heartthrob. The best way to my heart is talking about nutrient timing. But yes, so important in the supplement world. Because I think people always have a drive. Most people, I'll say, have a drive to be the better version or the best version of themselves. And so doing your research around what new trends are coming out and why they're coming out, like in these COVID times, is so important to be able to supplement your diet, because you've said multiple times in a whole food form, sometimes it's difficult to get the dose that you need to see the effect that you want. And so it is important to supplement some things and maybe just cover your bases if you don't know necessarily if you're actually getting those things.
Yeah, I mean, and if people are interested, in understanding trends, obviously PubMed is a good way to do it. But if you kind of want the more layman's way, there are definitely trade publications that you can access. It's free, and you just, you could do an email subscription. Nutri Ingredients, Nutraceutical World, PR Newswire. There's a couple out there those are my top 3 that I usually use, because they typically you can get it daily and you can see all the different trends out there of any kind of, supplement application that you're interested in. There's a lot out there.
Great. Yeah. Well, Sam, do you have any more words of advice around this supplement world or in this?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think, I'm definitely appreciative of everybody's time, and I hope they learned something. And thank you, Brittany, for having me. I really appreciate it. And just, I think kind of like how we were talking about before, it can get over scienced sometimes. I think for the most part, if you want to try something, it can't hurt, right? As long as it's safe. I think that's important to have a disclaimer. But I think trying something new is important, and if it works, that's great. And give it some time. So again, most of these things aren't acute, so give it a couple weeks. And if anybody has any questions, I'm always happy to answer them.
Exactly. And I'll provide Sam's all of his contact information in the show notes below, so you can access Sam readily. And if you have any questions about supplements, the process, or anything like that, I'm sure he'll be happy to field any of those requests. Because if you're anything like me, I love a good conversation around performance nutrition and exercise. So it has been.
And even, as I say, and even not performance related, any kind of supplement, people, I think there's so much out there. So I'm happy to give advice.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Well, it's been a pleasure, of course, Sam. And I look forward to maybe future podcasts and anything that you have to offer, all the knowledge that you have. I'm very grateful for it. So I hope you have
absolutely
a great night, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Hey guys, I am so excited for my new book entitled Through His Strength by Improving Ours, Family, to be released on February 4th. This book has been strategically designed to educate parents and caretakers on what the Bible and research have to say about exercise and nutrition. And then after they soak in all that good information, they will rally the family troops and complete discussion questions and fun practical application activities. To learn more about my new book, visit my website at www.drbrittanyRallman.com. That's www.drbrittanyRallman.com.